Well, good morning. Again, Happy New Year to everybody. Let's make this 2024 a great year. And we have choices to make about that. It's up to us. Anyway, we're working our way through the book, Doing Imago Relationship Therapy in the Space Between by Harville and his wife, Dr. Helen Hunt. So here we are up to Chapter 8, Developmental Challenges of Connecting. And in the first two editions of the book, Getting the Love You Want, Harville didn't use the word challenges, but rather the term wound. We come out of childhood wounded. I never liked the term. I certainly didn't feel wounded. Most of the people I get in my office wouldn't use that term. Some would, most wouldn't. And now he's changed that to childhood challenges, which I think I can live with better. Certainly, we all, I suppose, had challenges growing up. It means the same thing probably, but I think for me, challenges is better than wound. Okay, so he's going to look at the developmental challenges of connecting, so in adult life, but he looks at them in reference to the developmental stages that we all went through as children growing up. And those stages, those developmental stages were the connecting, so the first couple of years, exploration, probably up to 2 and 3, identity, 3 to 5, competency, 5 to 7, and social, usually same-sex best buddy, 7 to 13, and then from there on, the opposite sex. So those are certain developmental stages that we all went through, and none of us came through unscathed. You know, some of us bent out of shape more than others, but still, we're all bent out of shape a bit. And here's where I must admit, I prefer the term coach rather than therapist or counselor, because as a coach, generally, there's nothing wrong with my guys, but sometimes what they're doing is not working, or not working as well as they would like. And I believe the same is true of relationships. Whereas therapy, on the other hand, generally has a connotation there's something wrong with you. And that has a long history going back to Sigmund Freud, the grandfather of modern psychology. Because think about it, he was a doctor, you were the patient, you're on the couch, he's going to fix you. And I know some people need therapy. I know that. But I think most of us, yeah, we are all bent out of shape, but sometimes what we're doing is just not working. And Alfred Adler, a contemporary of Freud's, he suggested rather that children, by the time they're 4 or 5 for sure, have figured out how to fit into their little family of origin. They know how to get your attention, how to get their own way, etc. And he likened this to a map, say a very accurate map of your family of origin. He called it a lifestyle. And then what brings people to my office at 40 or 50 is, metaphorically, they're in Toronto, but they're still using their Windsor map. It's not working. But his conclusion, rather than there's something wrong with you, is that what you learned at 4 or 5 isn't working. Now, surely to God, at 40 or 50, you can learn something new if it's going to work better. And to me, that's just way more optimistic. Yeah, we are all bent out of shape, but there's nothing fundamentally wrong. But sometimes what people are doing is not working, especially in a relationship. Anyway, so Harville and Helen focus on the developmental challenges in those first 4 stages, because obviously the earlier the damage, the more trauma. And they also make the point that if the developmental challenges weren't met well in one stage, they drag those into the next stage, and then the next stage. The need doesn't go away, and so they bring it forward, and ultimately ends up in an adult intimate relationship. So they say, in adult relationships, the frustration and complaints will change because they are encountering the unfinished agenda of the next stage. This happens because in childhood, they did not engage the agenda of the next stage due to the challenge of the preceding stage, which, yeah. But basically what they're saying in adulthood, for instance, if an exploratory challenge, so the adult that didn't meet the needs in the exploratory stage, they resolve those issues and organically move towards the identity stage, then they'll encounter more challenges that didn't get met in childhood in the identity stage. And you can see it gets pretty complex. And they go into some depth examining these developmental stage specific challenges and the maximizing or minimizing defense of each stage, because what they're going to say is that typically And it's from their experience, and they've worked with thousands of couples, and they've trained a lot of us, and we've worked with thousands of couples. So typically a couple will connect with somebody who is wounded in the same or challenged in the same developmental stage, or the one next door. Like typically you wouldn't get somebody who is challenged in the first stage and it was somebody who's, you know, way up the line a bit. But they have opposite coping mechanisms. So they're wounded in the same area, but they tend to have opposite coping mechanisms, and it tends to be that maximizing, minimizing. And you'll see how that works out. You'll see that dance in each of these developmental challenge stages. So I'm going to go through the first 4 stages. It's complex, and they go into great depth about it. And that's what I'm going to say later on. I resort to the coaching. Anyway, let me go through it and then see if this makes sense to you. So in the first stage, the connecting stage, the connecting challenge partners, the themes, the core themes that will show up, they're related to the fear of being taken over, you know, or enmeshed. So if that didn't happen well, that the child feels taken over or enmeshed, or feeling rejected or abandoned. And you have the longing for or aversion to intimate contact as an adult, whether through touch, attention, discussion, or nonverbal messages. And in adulthood, we call the maximizers clingers. They want the partner there all the time. And the minimizers are called avoiders. So same wound, opposite coping mechanism. Next stage, the exploration challenge couple, we call the adult maximizer a pursuer. So the maximizer child pursued the caretaker looking for reassurance and guidance. All right, the minimizing partner, whom we call the distancer or isolator, has a habit of isolating themselves from their partner to avoid emotional suffocation, which they did as children. So you get a sense of the challenge and then the defense, but it's opposite and it shows up in the relationship. And that's, you know, why I keep saying we have to be conscious, we have to be aware. The identity challenge couple struggle with issues revolving around their identity or their sense of self and what or how to express it. The maximizing child with an unclear identity is in adulthood a diffuser, overly accommodating, too easily persuaded, and too often confused over who they are or what they want. As adults, minimizers have a rigid identity and are notorious for their tendency to remain unmoved by what their partner, and as he says, and sometimes their therapist, has to say. And then the 4th stage, the last stage they really deal with, for the competency challenge couple, in adult relationships we call the maximizing partner the manipulator. The manipulator partner can be described as being competent at being incompetent. And like the competitive child, the competency challenge minimizer adult, whom we named the competitor, usually looks good and often looks far better than their partner who was likely to be a competency challenge maximizer. Anyway, you get the idea. It's pretty complex. And so that's where I rely on my role as coach. Because I was always a basics kind of guy. Like in football or hockey, if my guys could do the basics well, we would win games. And for me, no matter where a couple is stuck or how or why, if they can do the basics well, they'll figure things out. And again, what are those basics? Safety, protect the space between, no negativity in the space between, and they have to learn to talk to each other in a safe way, and that's a safe conversation process. So my main goal is to encourage them to use a safe conversation process about whatever they're experiencing. If they can do that basic well, they'll figure things out. They'll figure out what will work for them. And the authors actually state, the Imago dialogue process is the intervention of choice and the only one needed for all couples in all developmental stages. But it has to be safe, and you have to learn to talk to each other in a safe way. And so in the next chapter, they do a deep dive into Imago dialogue, the process of connecting, and that's where I'll start next week. So again, I really appreciate, thanks for your continued interest. I know this can get pretty heavy, but again, it's just trying to explain that, on a evolutionary scale, we're moving towards a more relational, hopefully, civilization. I know you look at the news, it doesn't look like that, but we're right in the midst of the change from a more individualistic culture to hopefully a more relational culture, and it shows up in relationships. Okay? Anyway, thanks again. Have a great week. See you next week.